A powerful judge steps into the courtroom with one goal: put Karoline Leavitt behind bars. The charges are serious, the pressure is intense, and everyone expects a quick takedown. But just as the gavel is about to drop, something happens that no one saw coming. Leavitt doesn't beg, she responds. Not with fear, but with something far more dangerous to the case. What she reveals next leaves the entire courtroom stunned and the judge speechless. The situation began with a serious legal move from one of the highest authorities in the justice system. A decision had been made to push forward with criminal charges against a young and rising political figure, Karoline Leavitt. This was not a small issue or a civil disagreement. It was a strong attempt to place her behind bars. The courtroom was already tense before the hearing even started. Media outlets had picked up on the case. Headlines were spreading fast, and people were preparing for what they assumed would be a quick legal takedown. The judge handling the case had a well-known reputation, known for strict interpretation of the law and no tolerance for what was seen as disorder or defiance. This judge had taken a direct interest in the matter. From the very beginning, it appeared that the legal machinery was moving aggressively. Leavitt was accused of breaking serious rules, and those bringing the charges expected a fast, decisive response from the bench. The intent was clear: make an example, apply pressure, and leave no room for doubt about the power of the law. Official documents were drawn up carefully. The charges were listed one after another, each backed by legal arguments designed to stick. The prosecution claimed that there had been violations that could not be ignored. The courtroom was prepared for a hearing that would set the tone, not just for this one person, but as a message to others who might push against legal or political limits. The legal team working for the government had spent hours building what they believed to be a solid case. Their belief was that this would be a fast victory. There was no sign at first that the case would turn in any unexpected direction. Everything about the courtroom was organized to reflect seriousness. From the way the files were presented to the tone used by those in charge, it was clear this was an attempt not just to correct behavior, but to punish it. To those watching from the outside, it looked like a powerful moment, one where the justice system was going to show its full authority. But the charge to jail someone is one of the most serious powers a court can use. It's not about making someone pay a fine or admit guilt in a public statement. It's about removing someone from society entirely, taking away their freedom, and placing them under strict control. That level of punishment carries weight, both legally and morally. So when the judge made the first formal statements about the charges, there was a sense that something final was beginning. The people in the courtroom, reporters, legal assistants, even some spectators, watched closely. They expected a routine event: accusations, evidence, a response, and then a likely ruling in favor of the court. The judge's early comments gave the same impression. The tone was direct. There was little room for discussion or delay. From a procedural view, this was a textbook approach. Move the case forward, allow minimal resistance, and reach a conclusion based on strong legal precedent. As part of this early process, the judge emphasized the seriousness of the charges and reminded the courtroom of the potential outcome: prison time. This was not a light suggestion. It was a public reminder that authority was not being questioned. Instead, it was being demonstrated in full force. The effort to jail Leavitt wasn't hidden behind soft language. It was openly stated as a possible and even expected result. This beginning phase of the legal conflict set the tone for what many thought would be a straightforward loss for Leavitt. The courtroom design, the judge's history, the nature of the charges, everything seemed to favor the side pushing for imprisonment. The early minutes of the hearing showed full control by the legal authority. Questions were pointed, rules were enforced strictly, and timelines were kept tight. The defense was being given its turn, but under clear limits. In that moment, the courtroom seemed like a place where one outcome was already being shaped: a guilty finding that would lead directly to prison. The individual being charged was facing more than just legal accusations. They were facing the full symbolic weight of a system prepared to act fast and act strongly. For anyone watching, It looked like a perfect example of how quickly power can move when it feels challenged. The courtroom was silent, but the tension was loud. Every person seated could sense that this was not a normal legal matter. It wasn't just about charges or evidence. It was about power. At the center of the situation stood someone who had earned respect from the legal world through years of decisions and rulings. This legal figure had a reputation for being firm, fair, but also completely in control. And when the decision was made to move forward with criminal charges, the message was clear. This wasn't just a legal case. It was a demonstration of authority. The plan to jail the young political figure seemed straightforward on the surface. There were claims of legal violations, and the prosecution had support from strong legal professionals. With this kind of structure and backing, most people thought the outcome was already decided. The judge leading the case carried the kind of influence that made others in the courtroom cautious. The lawyers chosen to argue against the defendant were sharp and confident, fully trusting the system to support their position. But beyond the legal arguments and documents was something else, an assumption. The assumption was that the person on trial could be handled easily, that she would either panic under the legal pressure or quietly accept whatever deal was placed in front of her. It was expected that the courtroom would follow a familiar pattern. The legal authority would question, challenge, and control the flow of events, while the defendant would follow, respond, and ultimately lose. The goal was not just punishment. It was about setting an example, showing that certain actions, especially from younger voices who speak boldly in public, would not go unchecked. From the first moment of the case, the actions taken were aggressive. The charges presented were heavy. The tone of the questioning was sharp. The courtroom arrangement itself made it clear who held the power. This kind of pressure works in many cases. When the person accused lacks legal training or confidence, the process of facing a courtroom can be overwhelming. The formal language, the rules, the history behind every procedure, it all adds weight. Most people in such a position become silent or uncertain, depending completely on others to speak for them. That's what was expected this time too. Even before the trial fully began, small signs showed that the process was being shaped to emphasize control. The opening statements given by the prosecution used strong words. They painted a picture of someone who had not only broken rules but had done so with disrespect for the legal system. The judge's early comments also carried a tone of warning, making it clear that this would not be a casual proceeding. It was serious, and the consequences could be severe. But behind all of this was a deeper purpose. The legal actions weren't only about whether a rule had been broken. They were also about whether the person in the courtroom could be forced into submission through legal pressure. When a powerful legal figure moves quickly toward imprisonment rather than civil action or investigation, it shows a belief that the situation requires control, not conversation. There was a strong belief that the person being charged would fold under the seriousness of the situation. The legal figure believed the courtroom could be used not just as a place of justice, but as a tool of intimidation. After all, who would dare argue against someone with so much legal knowledge and authority? Who would have the courage or ability to speak in the same language, law, logic, and precedent? The answer at first didn't seem important. Most people thought it would be over quickly. A few hearings, some legal motions, and then a final decision handed down from above. That's how it normally went when high legal power met someone with less influence. But that assumption turned out to be the first mistake. The choice to push so hard, so fast, to aim directly for jail time instead of allowing space for defense, came from a position of confidence, but also from a mindset that underestimated the other side. It assumed that authority alone would be enough, that the courtroom's weight and the name behind the bench would silence whatever resistance came forward. That's how the situation began, with a show of legal power meant not just to correct, but to dominate. The court, the charges, the structure, and the language all served one goal: to make the target of the case feel small, outmatched, and incapable of defending herself. It was legal force used as a warning, designed to break confidence before the trial even began. The courtroom was tense. A serious legal move had been made. The goal was not a fine, a warning, or a simple hearing, it was jail time. The decision to push for imprisonment was bold, and most people believed it would go through without much resistance. After all, the one facing this challenge was not a judge, not a lawyer, and not someone with courtroom experience. Most expected the usual pattern. The accused would speak briefly, legal representatives would handle the rest, and the court would proceed without much disruption. But the person at the center of this legal firestorm did something unexpected. Instead of hiding behind legal counsel or reacting emotionally, she chose to take an active role. She didn't raise her voice or show frustration. Instead, she stood with a calm focus and began to respond with clarity. It became clear very quickly that she had no interest in being quiet or passive. She didn't argue based on feelings or opinions. She started by pointing out specific errors in the legal statements made against her. Her words were respectful but strong. She showed that she had read the documents carefully. She understood the charges. She understood the law being used against her, and she wasn't going to let confusion or fear silence her. She explained why certain parts of the accusation didn't meet the legal standard required for jail time. She questioned how the evidence was gathered. She asked whether the procedures used in her case followed the correct legal steps. These were not random questions. They were precise. She knew the timeline, the technical requirements, and even how similar cases had been handled before. Her questions were not just to delay the process. They were to reveal that something was not right. The judge and legal officials in the room took notice. At first, they tried to move past her points, but she kept returning to the law. She stayed, focused on facts. She spoke with a level of understanding that few expected. It was not loud or theatrical. It was disciplined and prepared. Even as pressure increased, her voice did not shake. The courtroom could feel it. She was not afraid. She was not overwhelmed. She was engaging with the law, not running from it. She used every opportunity to highlight legal inconsistencies in the case. And each time she spoke, her arguments grew stronger. There were moments when the court paused. Legal officials had to check their own documents. Some points she made required further clarification from the prosecution. This was unusual. It was supposed to be a straightforward legal process where authority would move fast and the accused would follow. But she changed that dynamic with her refusal to back down. Her strategy was not to fight the system, but to use the system correctly. She wasn't asking for special treatment. She wasn't demanding shortcuts. She was asking that the law be followed exactly as it was written. She made it clear that she understood her rights and that she expected them to be respected. She did not claim to be above the law. Instead, she showed that the law protects everyone, even someone in her position. That was the turning point. The courtroom no longer saw a one-sided conflict. It became a conversation shaped by legal rules, logic, and fairness. She was not reacting like someone under threat. She was responding like someone who understood the framework of justice. Observers began to see the difference. This was not someone resisting authority just to make a scene. This was someone standing firmly, using knowledge and self-control to protect herself. She didn't wait for others to speak for her. She knew the risks, and still, she chose to speak up. Not because she wanted attention, but because she believed in using the truth of the law to defend herself. This was more than courage. It was an informed decision to engage the legal system head-on. She turned what could have been a one-sided judgment into a balanced legal examination, all because she chose not to stay silent, and because she had done the hard work of learning how the system works. Her actions reminded everyone that sometimes the strongest defense is not about loud words, but about knowing exactly where you stand and why the law is supposed to protect you, not scare you. As the courtroom grew silent, the expectation was that the defense would follow a predictable path: brief statements, lawyer-led arguments, and perhaps a few emotional appeals. The charges were serious. The judge had entered the proceedings with confidence and firm direction, showing little doubt in the outcome. Most people watching believed that the case would be quickly settled, with the defendant left struggling to push back. But what followed was something no one had planned: For from the very beginning of the response, the energy in the room began to shift. The defendant, standing calmly in front of the court, did not rely on emotion or confusion. Instead, she delivered carefully structured legal reasoning. Every point she made was backed by actual law, statutes, court rulings, and procedural standards that even experienced lawyers sometimes overlook. This wasn't a person guessing their way through a legal defense. This was someone who had clearly spent time studying how the legal system works, not just on paper, but in practice. She began by challenging the very basis of the charges. With a clear voice, she explained how the accusations were not supported by the evidence as required by specific legal standards. Then she moved to explain how the procedures used during the investigation were flawed. She described how certain actions taken against her were outside what is normally allowed under due process. The level of detail was surprising. She quoted laws and explained their meanings in simple, exact terms. She didn't just say something was wrong. She showed why, using legal language that was correct and persuasive. Court observers started to shift in their seats. Lawyers looked at their notes. Reporters whispered to each other. The judge leaned forward slightly, focusing more closely. It was becoming obvious that this was not a regular defense. This was a legal performance, but not for show. It was real. Every sentence had purpose, every claim was backed up. There were no emotional outbursts, no vague accusations, just sharp, well-researched arguments. At one point, the judge asked a direct question, expecting a quick response or hesitation. But instead of struggling, the defendant answered with clarity. Not only did she answer the question, she used the opportunity to highlight a gap in the prosecution's approach. She referenced a past federal case with a similar issue and explained how the outcome in that case applied to her own situation. The courtroom went quiet again, not because of what was said emotionally, but because of how solid the explanation was legally. People in the courtroom began to realize that this person had more than just courage. She had deep legal understanding. This was not learned overnight. It was clear that she had studied laws, court procedures, and case history for a long time. Not casually, but with discipline and purpose. She even pointed out language in certain laws that were often misunderstood and used that to strengthen her position. She spoke the way a legal scholar would speak, calmly, directly, and with command of the material. The judge's posture slowly changed. The firm tone from earlier began to soften slightly. The questions became more precise, as if searching for a way to better understand the arguments rather than knock them down. The balance in the room was shifting. It no longer felt like a judge controlling a case against a regular citizen. It now felt like a courtroom discussion between two legal minds. What made it even more impressive was that she never once claimed to be above the law. She respected the legal system. She showed that by using it exactly as it was designed to ensure fairness, protect rights, and demand that all legal actions be held to a standard, she didn't twist the law. She explained it as it is, and in doing so, corrected misunderstandings that were leading to false conclusions. This moment was not about fame or position. It was about showing how strong legal thinking can come from unexpected places. In a world where people often depend fully on their attorneys, she proved that understanding the law yourself can be a powerful tool. She didn't try to impress anyone with big words. She used simple, direct language that carried undeniable strength because it was rooted in truth and logic. This wasn't a dramatic speech or a last-minute attempt to escape consequences. It was a calm, step-by-step explanation of why the charges didn't hold up under legal scrutiny. And in that setting, with so many watching and waiting, the power of knowledge took center stage. As the courtroom proceedings continued, something began to change in the way the case unfolded. In the beginning, the mood had been quite serious. The legal authority involved had acted with full confidence, using the power of the bench to push for a strong punishment. The case seemed straightforward to many watching, an attempt to send a clear message through a tough legal response. But slowly, that certainty began to shift. It wasn't because of external influence, emotion, or public pressure. The change came from the courtroom itself, from how one individual responded, not with fear, but with knowledge. The person facing these charges didn't react the way most people do when put under heavy legal pressure. There was no panic, no confusion. Instead, there was focus. Every question asked was answered with a detailed, well-thought-out response. Every point raised by the prosecution was met with a counterpoint that was not only calm, but deeply rooted in legal logic. It didn't take long before those in the room began to realize this was no ordinary defendant. The courtroom, which had been quiet with tension, now carried a sense of growing curiosity. The legal arguments being made were not simple. They included references to specific constitutional principles and procedural standards. But what made them so impressive was the clarity with which they were explained. Complex ideas were made simple. Important rights were outlined in ways even a non-lawyer could understand. It was clear that the person on trial had taken the time to learn how the system works, not just on the surface, but in its deeper layers. This wasn't just someone fighting back emotionally. This was someone who had prepared with discipline and intelligence. The judge, who had started the case expecting to control the courtroom easily, now began to listen more closely. Every objection raised was met with supporting documents, previous rulings, and precise legal language. The surprise was not just in the facts being shared, but in the skill with which they were used. It was like watching someone speak a second language fluently, except in this case the language was law. This led to a quiet but powerful shift in the courtroom. The judge no longer looked as certain as before. Questions became more careful. The tone softened, not out of sympathy, but out of recognition. This was not a situation where someone could be dismissed or overruled easily. The legal reasoning presented was too solid. It could not be ignored. It had to be addressed fully and respectfully. Observers in the courtroom, including legal professionals and journalists, began taking notes more quickly. The story they had expected, one of punishment and power, was turning into something else. It became a lesson about underestimating people. Just because someone is young, not famous for law, or doesn't wear a legal title, does not mean they are unaware of their rights or incapable of defending them with skill. What made the situation even more striking was the quiet confidence with which everything was handled. There were no dramatic gestures, no loud challenges. Every word was chosen with care. Every document shared had purpose. And every law cited made sense in the context of the case. It was the kind of legal thinking usually seen from experienced professionals. Yet here it was, coming from someone without a legal background, facing serious consequences, standing alone. This moment taught everyone in the room that real power in a courtroom doesn't always come from position. It can come from preparation, it can come from study, and it can come from someone who refuses to accept guilt without a fair fight, not through force but through understanding. That's what changed the judge's perspective. At first, it had seemed like a simple process: bring charges, prove a case, issue punishment. But it quickly became clear that the person sitting in defense had more than a response. They had a strategy. Every step was part of a bigger picture. Every answer pushed the courtroom closer to the truth that the case wasn't as solid as it seemed. That truth couldn't be denied, even by the one holding the gavel. The judge, known for strong decisions and little tolerance for delays, found themselves facing something rare: respect earned not through position, but through unmatched legal clarity. The planned outcome could not proceed as expected, not because of pressure from outside, but because of the undeniable legal genius unfolding right there in court.